Let's expand on that because a leaked Public Protector's interim report absolves President Cyril Ramaphosa of wrongdoing in the Phala Phala Farm theft scandal. The report finds that the president did not cover up for the theft and didn't breach the executive ethics code. Leaders of opposition parties are questioning what they believe are anomalies and contradictions in the investigation. For more on this, we're joined by legal expert Benedict Phiri. Thank you very much, Benedict, for availing yourself this afternoon. Maybe let's take a look at the findings on page 181, and it speaks of the allegation that the president improperly and in violation of the provisions of the Executive Ethics Code exposed himself to any risk of a conflict between his constitutional duties and obligations and his private interests arising from or affected by his alleged paid work in Phala Phala Farm is not substantiated. The Public Protector's investigation has revealed that Phala Phala Farm is managed by a private entity called Ntabanyoni Close Corporation through its own private employees on land owned and registered under Chivase Trust. Having gone through that section of the report, did you find any anomalies or irregularities?
Yes, certainly. I certainly think that the Public Protector's interim finding, and I think we must just stress that, this is not the final report, that the president did not undertake paid work at Phala Phala because, the close corporation, or the business rather, was run by managers, is actually elevating form over substance, because we all know with close corporations, you don't have the distinction you would have in a private company between shareholders and a board. Effectively, the shareholder, Mr. Ramaphosa, is also the board, and he's in charge from a fiduciary perspective over all the operations of Phala Phala. So to say that managers such as Mr. Von Wellach are in charge is not sufficient. Ultimately, the buck would stop with him. And I think even the manner in which the proceeds were discussed from Mr. Hazim between himself, Mr. Van Wellach, and Mr. Ndlovu suggests that the president is actually running a business. And even though, he has declared that he has never received remuneration, ultimately he is 100% interest in that business and also directs the activities of that business. So I think in that particular instance, the Public Protector elevated form over substance, and I think the substance and reality would be as the Noble, or the rather the Section 89 Commission had found on this particular aspect.
And then on the allegation that the president failed to report the crime that took place at Phala Phala Farm and abused his power in utilizing state resources by causing the PPS to be deployed to Phala Phala Farm and to investigate a housebreaking with the intent to steal and theft at the said farm is not substantiated. The evidence placed before the Public Protector neither supports the allegation that the president failed to report the crime of housebreaking with the intent to steal and theft of cash and foreign currency at his residence in Phala Phala Farm, nor does it support the allegation of abuse of power in utilizing state resources caused by the PPS to be deployed, and so it goes. Is there a misunderstanding or an irregularity on this finding?
I think, given the president's version, as set out in the interim report, it does appear that, he had reported the matter to General Rood. The DPCI played a role at some point as well, and various police officers played some role. I think the problem is that the docket's gone missing, and, this cannot be pieced together in a cogent manner. So I think there is some question marks around whether the president's version can actually withstand scrutiny on that respect. And I think if you look at it plainly, that the Presidential Protection Unit was utilized to actually investigate this matter, then there is a suggestion there that there may have been an abuse of the president's office at most, and at least the president would have put himself in a position where his personal interests would have conflicted with his office as the president of the country. So I think that is going to be potentially a ground for review if the Public Protector's interim report doesn't change on that score as well.
Yeah, because what we went through in terms of the first finding, the allegation that the president improperly and in violation of the provisions of the Executive Ethics Code exposed himself to any risk of conflict between his constitutional duties and obligations and his private interests arising from the sale is not substantiated. And then she goes on, or the report, I beg your pardon, goes on in 8.2.3, this leaked report, which is subject to change, to say, based on the evidence obtained, the public protector concludes that the president reported the security breach in the form of a housebreaking at Phala Phala Farm on 10 February 2020 to General Rueda. The public protector further finds that on the 2nd of March in 2020, the president reported the theft of cash and foreign currency, which took place on the same day of the housebreaking at his private residence on Phala Phala Farm to General Rueda, who is the senior police officer and a member of the SAPS.
Yes, and I think that's correct. I think if you're looking at, the question of conflict of interest, the question is then how does General Rueda proceed to investigate a matter that relates to the president's private interests without there being, the elements of what should have happened from an SAPS perspective being followed. And I think that does lend itself to the suggestion that the president may have exposed himself to a situation which would have led to a potential conflict of interest between his interests privately as well as his role and duties as the president.
Mm. Accordingly, the public protector could not find any evidence upon which to conclude that the deployment of the PPS at the president's private residence at Phala Phala Farm amounts to abuse of SAPS resources, since he is entitled to this protection in terms of the presidential handbook, read together with the PPS policy as indicated above, and this is 8.2.7 on page 186. When a crime happens at the residence of a president, whom does he report it to, or where does he report it to?
I suppose the question here is what was needed to happen in respect of PRECA, which is the anti-corruption legislation. That is what really creates the issue, from a PRECA perspective. And the president suggested that, well, General Rueda is the person that I discussed this with, and he said to me that he would escalate it within the SAPS, and he is a police official. So I suppose in that particular context, you could construe that the president adequately reported this particular issue. But what becomes problematic is the manner in which the police, or rather General Rueda, then furthers the particular matter without there being the official dockets and what is required from an SAPS perspective. And the question then is, what did General Rueda do? Was he actually just going on his own frolic, or was he actually subject to the advice and instructions of the president? And I think, those are aspects which the interim report doesn't stress quite clearly, and certainly leaves a lot of unanswered questions around.
Sure. I just want us to go back to the first finding. Paragraph 8.1.2 on page 182 states that the evidence and information before the public protector indicates that the US dollars stolen at Phala Phala Farm on or about the 9th of February 2020 emanate from a private cash transaction between private persons. Mr. Mustafa Mohammed Ibrahim Hazim, a citizen of Sudan, and it details when he arrived in the country and purchased the buffalo on the 25th of December in 2019. This transaction between private persons, is it clear to you who those persons are? Or the other half of the
suggestion is that it's
Sorry, the other half of the person.
Yes. The other half of the private person is Ntabanyoni, which is a close corporation, 100% owned by the president. And I think what the public protector tried to do is say there is a distinction between the president as a shareholder of Ntabanyoni and Ntabanyoni as a legal entity on its own. And this is where I said it elevates form over substance, because ultimately if you 100% own a closed corporation, you may as well, for all intents and purposes, be a sole proprietor. It's not the same as a company which would have a separate board of directors, which would be subject to their own fiduciary duties, separate from the shareholders' interests in that particular matter. But in this particular matter, the president's interests as shareholder or member of the closed corporation, as well as the owner of the closed corporation and the closed corporation, are actually morphed, and they are one. I don't think you can separate it, especially given his 100% interest. So, that for me was not convincing from the public protector.
Well, here's something that is substantiated according to this linked report, which is subject to change. The allegation that the members of the South African Police Services attached to PPS acted improperly by investigating the crime of housebreaking with the intent to steal and theft, which took place on or about the 9th of February 2020 at Phala Phala Farm. So that at least is substantiated. Was this a correct reading?
I think if you look at this conspectus of the evidence and, what was summarized from what the DPCI said, IPID said, what General Rueda said as well as Mr. Ngovu and the President, I think that could be a fair reading of actually what happened with respect to the conduct of those particular people and the finding made by the public protector related to that.
What then happens should this particular aspect, we'll get into the other ones that we dealt with a little bit in a few moments, but then what happens to this particular aspect if it does not change? Because it would appear from the report that the president is clear, however, the people tasked with protecting him are the problem. Is that a correct reading on my part, maybe?
I think the way the report is currently written, it appears that way. But as we sort of have discussed earlier, I think there is a question around whether the president has actually breached the executive ethics code in respect of undertaking paid work. I don't think that the answer that the public protector got to is the correct answer in this respect. So that would be subject to review if it doesn't change. Secondly, I think the question of conflict of interest, if it doesn't change, would also be subject to review. And then, on that third bit, I think it would follow, depending on what the outcome is on the question of conflict of interest, whether there should be any changes to the conduct of the people around the president at that particular point in time, including members of the SAPS and General Rueda. I think it may be that you might still find that they still conducted themselves in a manner that they shouldn't, but also still find that the president did not resolve a potential conflict of interest between his private interests and his office.
So we heard from SARS last week. We are yet to hear from the South African Reserve Bank. Are you looking forward to anything from that leg of this spider web, if anything?
And I think this is partly some of the problem with the way the Phala Phala matter has sort of unfolded. The Section 89 panel didn't have a full set of information, and it's very clear from the public protector's interim report that she wasn't able to obtain certain information from people like SARS or the South African Reserve Bank. But it will be interesting to see what the South African Reserve Bank uncovers when it completes its investigation, because prima facie there appears to be a violation of South Africa's exchange control regulations with respect to the declaration of foreign currency and foreign transactions in the country. But obviously, the South African Reserve Bank reported to the public protector that they couldn't say too much about this and asked her to wait for the outcome of their report. I am interested to see where that will take things and whether that might necessitate a changing of how we view the outcome of, or at least the interim outcome of, the public protector's investigation.
Legal expert Benedict Phiri, thank you very much for your time this afternoon.